He's far too clever for us. Now let's look secondly at the inheritance of the land. The inheritance of the land. And I'm going to put a Star of David because it's of Israel's land. Okay. We'll continue reading, and this is Ezekiel 47 verse 13 to chapter 48 until the end of that chapter. We won't read everything, but we're just going to note what God's land is going to look like. So we'll just read the first few verses, and then we'll summarize chapter 48. So then it says, "Thus says the Lord God, this shall be the boundary by which you shall divide the land for an inheritance among the 12 tribes of Israel." So Israel's going to get their inheritance when Jesus comes back in the land. And it says, Joseph shall have 2 portions. Why does Joseph have 2 portions? Because he is the firstborn of the beloved wife, Rachel. And the firstborn gets a double portion of the inheritance. So in that sense, he gets it. Secondly, Jacob adopted Joseph's 2 sons as though they were his own, Ephraim and Manasseh. So God is giving to Ephraim and Manasseh a portion each. But no one gets robbed. No one gets robbed. Because look at this. This shall be the boundary of the land, in verse 15, on the north side from the great sea, by the way of Hethlon. Some people say Hethlon is Beirut, or around Beirut. So if you look at the land of Israel, and I'm not very good at drawing, so you're going to have to excuse me. There's the land of Israel. There's the brook of Egypt. Tel Aviv is somewhere here. Mount Hermon is somewhere here. That's the Dead Sea. That's Jerusalem. Up here, well into Lebanon. That's the northern part of the border. That doesn't belong to Israel today. It belongs to Lebanon. You're talking Lebanon and Syria. Way up there. There's Damascus around here. Let's look at this. Okay, Hethlon to the entrance of Zedad. No one's really sure where Zedad is, but Hamat, we do know where it is. It's in the northern part of Syria, north of Damascus. That is Hamat. So you're dealing up here, not too far from the Euphrates. Solomon spread his kingdom as far north as this. And so it says here, Hamat Berotah, that's north of Damascus. Sibraim, we don't quite know where that is, which is between the border of Damascus and the border of Hamat. So there's Hamat, there's Damascus. In between the two is the northern border of Israel's territory, land that belongs to them that they inherit, where their tribes will be placed. And I don't think that, I might be stand to correction, but I don't think Israel's tribes actually inhabited these parts even when Solomon conquered them. He had those people under him, but I could be wrong. And then it says Hazer Hatikon, which is by the border of Haran. The boundary will extend from the sea to Hazar Enan at the border of Damascus, and on the north toward the north is the border of Hamat. And so we've seen that there. And then it says this is the north side. The east side, from between Haran, Damascus, Gilead, and the land of Israel, shall be the Jordan. So it goes down here. Now we're going to see that Israel will also own this. But here we're dealing with God parceling up this land between the 12 tribes. Okay? But Israel will also own this. Okay, and so it says here, it shall be the Jordan from the north border to the eastern sea, you shall measure. So that's all the way down there to the Dead Sea, the eastern sea. That is all Israel's territory in the millennium, where they will inherit land. And then it says, verse 19, the south side toward the south shall extend from Tamar. Tamar is just south of, around about here. So there's Arabia. There's the Wadi of Egypt. That's the Sinai Peninsula. And that here is Egypt. Okay? Tamar is the southern side. It says here, Tamar, as far as the waters of Meribah Kadesh, to the brook of Egypt and the Great Sea. That's the south side. So basically, your land's going to look like this, the land of Israel when Jesus comes back, where Israel actually inherits territory. Okay. So that's what's going to be divided between the 12 tribes. Okay. So if you look at chapter 48, and we're not going to go through all these verses, but in verse 1, we see right at the top is Dan. So Dan gets the top. And let's bring Jerusalem a little bit further north there so we fit everybody in nicely. Next to Dan is Asher in verse 2. Have you got a nicer map? Yeah. I'm not an artist. Verse 3, Naphtali. And verse 4, Manasseh. I'm just going to put N. I'm not going to write the whole names now. Verse 5, Ephraim. So those are the two tribes of Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim. They get double portion. And then after Ephraim is Reuben. And then after Reuben is Judah. Okay? Judah is the tribe from which David was descended. Jesus was descended from Judah. But look at this. After Judah, there's a section here with Jerusalem in the middle. And around Jerusalem, there's going to be places where the priests can have a place. Okay? So even Levi is taken care of. So the priests will be there. And then we see that in verse 8 to 20. And then on either side of this land belongs to the prince on either side. The prince. The prince can give these sections of this land to any of his sons whom he wishes. Jesus is the prince. How does he have sons? Because he adopts them. Look at what Isaiah, hold your finger there and go to Isaiah. Isaiah 53. We looked at this last week when we looked at the prince. Okay. Verse 10. But the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief. If he would render himself as a gift offering, he will see his offspring, his seed, and will prolong his days. Jesus has seed. That means descendants. How does he have it? The same way any other person would have seed. If they weren't fathering children, they would adopt. They would adopt children. Jesus when you adopt someone as a king, you have under rulers under you. So when you say you are under rulers, you say to the person, Today you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Just like God said to David, ultimately speaking about Jesus, who is the son, the adopted son of God. He's the son of God because he was born from God and he comes from God and he is God. But he's also the son of God in another sense. He's the adopted king. He's the king placed in ruling under God over God's people. So he's the adopted son of God. We are adopted sons of God. We are like Jesus in his sonship of adoption. We're not like Jesus in his sonship of the eternal sonship of God. So Jesus is going to give some of this to his disciples, whoever he chooses. Jesus said to the 12 disciples, you will be sitting on the 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. I can imagine that the 12 apostles are going to get a piece of land there. Right? But the important thing is this. The reason why God gives the prince land is because the kings of Israel in history took other people's inheritance for themselves. Think of Ahab with the Naboth's vineyard. Killed Naboth to steal the vineyard. His wife brought false witnesses to incriminate him so they could put him to death to take his vineyard. God says no longer. Everybody's inheritance will stay with them, and in order to ensure that, God gives the prince his own section, his own piece of land that's got nothing to do with the 12 tribes. So the people who inherit this land, this piece of land, inherit it without replacing Israel in their inheritance. There is integration without replacement. We are sharers with Israel in their spiritual blessings. We are not usurpers. We're not replacing them. We're integrated in among them. But we don't displace them of their blessings. They are their blessings. So in the similar way, the prince and those sons he chooses will get inheritance without displacing the 12 tribes of their inheritance. That's the wisdom of God. So look at this. Going back to Ezekiel. So then after verses 20 to 21, we read about the prince. Then we have verse 23, Benjamin, who is the other son of Rachel. After Benjamin, that's verse 23. Verse 24 is Simeon. And verse 25 is Issachar. And verse 26 is Zebulun. And then the next verse is Gad. He's right at the bottom there. That's the 12 tribes and their inheritance. Let's look at Zephaniah. Zephaniah 2. On top of this, Israel is going to own sections of land, and some of which is not part of the territory that they inherit, but is extra land given to the Jews. Zephaniah chapter 2 and verse 4. It says, "For Gaza will be abandoned and Ashkelon a desolation. Ashdod will be driven out at noon, and Ekron will be uprooted." This section of land here is called the Gaza Strip. That's what it's called today. Today, Hamas rule the Gaza Strip, but the Palestinian, I think the PLO, governing the whole of the Palestinian people, but Hamas are the stronghold here in Gaza. Okay? Israel pulled their people out of Gaza, and the Arabs came in and stayed. They got to inherit that Gaza, and through Gaza they've made terror tunnels into Israel to try and smuggle weapons in to fight, and Israel have always located them and dealt with it. And at times when they've tried to attack, Israel have blockaded it to stop that, but then the Western nations turn around saying they're cutting aid off Gaza. So you see the tension that's there today. One day, this is going to become desolated. Okay? But then, verse 5, "Woe to the inhabitants of the seacoast, the nation of the Cherethites," which is Philistines, where we get the word Palestinian from. So they're not genetically or ethnically related to the Philistines, but hey, if you want to take the name, if you want to be called a Philistine, then this is going to apply to you, basically. So here, the nation of the Cherethites, the word of the Lord is against you, O Canaan, land of the Philistines. So I will destroy you, so that there will be no inhabitant. Oh, you just want Arabs to get saved. You want Arabs to get saved. Instead, we should protest the treatment of Israel by other nations, but we shouldn't wish evil or harm on those other nations. We need to seek for salvation, because you read this, it says, there will be no inhabitant. So the seacoast will be pastures and caves for shepherds and folds for flocks, and the coast will be for the remnant of the house of Judah. They will pasture on it. So this is going to become pasture lands. And it says, in the houses of Ashkelon, they will lie down at evening, for the Lord their God will take care of them and restore their fortune. So that's Gaza. Now, that from verse 8 to 9, we read about Jordan, or at least northern Jordan here. I have heard the taunting of Moab and the revilings of the sons of Ammon, which they have taunted my people and become arrogant against their territory. Therefore, as I live, declares the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, surely Moab will be like Sodom, a desolation, and the sons of Ammon like Gomorrah, a place possessed by nettles like weeds and salt pits, a perpetual desolation. The remnant of my people will plunder them, and the remainder of my nation will inherit them. So this land east of the Jordan, and we're going to see this same going to be about Edom as well, are going to be inherited by Israel, even though they're not part of the territory given to the tribes. So this will generically be for Israel as a nation, and this will generically be for Israel as a nation as well. That meaning that that land is not like Manasseh necessarily gets this part and Ephraim gets this part. It's just for Israel. They possess it, they inherit it as part of God's gift to them, even though it's not part of the land that God's promised them. If that makes sense.
But when God told Abraham, he did tell him this, that this, and he told...
Yeah, he told him from the brook of Egypt to the Euphrates, which is about here. So this, but it's not necessarily including here, because God gave Moab this one, or is it Ammon this one, and Moab this one, and Edom this one. But Israel's going to get that territory as well on top of their own inheritance. Yeah. Why? Because they hate God's people. Because of the hatred they have for Israel.